Veritas Acquitus by Bones Boy 15, Chapter 33, The Crying Land. A few days later, far from Beacon Academy, the troubles of the teenage students within, a cloaked man walked into a small tavern to escape the pouring rain. He asked for a drink and sat at a round table, not set far off to the side. Soon enough, a few brave drunks that wished to be merry and share their sorrows with one another sat around the stranger. "So, what brought you here, stranger?" asked one of the drunks. "Well, to explain why I'm here, I'll have to tell you a brief story." He pulled a roll of parchment from his cloak and gestured to the table. "May I?" "Sure. This ought to be good." A map unrolled across the small tavern's tabletop, and a calloused hand set a glass down on the corner to keep it steady. A small oil lantern illuminated the map, revealing it to be scrawled on an old parchment with faded writings and glyphs. The owner of the map spoke lowly to his audience. "Far to Vale's west, as most could tell you, is the kingdom of Vacuo. It's set within the middle of a desert-like region that was, for the most part, intolerable to human and faunus, and even grim alike, were it not for the few yet widespread oases where smaller settlements started to form near Vacuo. Possibly would not have been made it to the measure of a kingdom. Perhaps in another time, where the royals didn't immediately insult their would-be subjects and instead inspired unity to preserve, it would have made it to this status on its own. However, we know there were 6 known successful settlements hidden throughout the desert that the main hub owed its success to. The first to settle properly was the village of Khan, which previously had a longer name, but after so many battles and grim attacks in its early years, the name had been shortened to lower than the repair time on the gates that surrounded it. Khan was a lush place set comfortably near the border of Vale's Reach and acted often as a hub of travel and trade prior to the development of the air vehicles, with the mountainside devoted to protecting the city village's flank, and a forest that contained a decent amount of grim as well as other settled carnivorous animals. Khan was arguably the village with the least volatile surroundings, and was home to people who carried what was soon called the Will of Fire, a fortitude that couldn't be snuffed out, no matter how many times it was put down. It was because of this common feature amongst its citizens that Khan started to be called the domain of defenders, the city that acted as the first and last stand during the war when Bel attempted to expand its borders. Sometime shortly after, Vacuo's people established another city village, Stone, they called it, at first as propaganda, rather stupid and unimaginative, if you ask me. The speaker chuckled and gestured to the map. Stone, as one could expect, was hidden deep underground, created near an underground spring somewhere in the southeast. Its best defense was the difficulty which came from trying to get to it, and its unknown length spread across its territory. Grim, like any other settlement, moved in nearby, particularly the grim that enjoyed dark caves and thrived underground. Grapploids, creepers, and deathstalkers were a constant threat. Stone's people were noted to often be cruel and cold towards outsiders, having so tightly knit a community that held its own laws and agreements above those of other kingdoms. Were it not for the Vacuan royals making an agreement during the settlement's start, it could be argued that Stone might have made a move to shift the balance of power. Thankfully, that didn't happen, officially anyway, but that was its own story. Now, around the same time, 3 more city villages began to spring up. The one that would become the primary home of Vacuo's military was set high on a mountaintop to Vacuo's northwest. They called it appropriately the Hidden Cloud. As I said before, it was originally a military outpost turned city village. As I said before, it was originally a village, and its high position makes traverses to it very, very difficult, and the grim around it didn't help with that. Let me tell you, more than once, Nevermore's griffins. Hell, I think there was even a grim drake that sieged the village walls. Nevertheless, the warriors of Cloud never gave an inch to these attacks and acted as the sword of Vacuo. Most who wished to be pilots dream of applying to the Cloud skyscraper flight school. They have a decently sized amount of hopeful hunters, and that number was increased in recent years since Vacuo's compliance with the order of the Council of Vital. However, they remain loyal to Vacuo's first and foremost, though they aren't as loyal as the Next, the Lost Village. The Lost Village. The Suna, the map's owner, withheld a smirk at the sound of a sharp gasp. The vagabonds and runaways dream home. Those with nowhere to go often fled here first to establish new lives. It was once thought that Suna was the true kingdom and the real home of Vacuo's royals, but the war revealed that it was home to the last line of defense. It was home to the last line of defense. Hunters, soldiers, even who were born and raised in Suna, are said to have incredible durability, and even scare off Grim with just their presence alone. However, with the war's completion, Suna vanished from the radar, and if not for the Five Villages tournament, would be believed to be only a myth, though their fame was rivaled only by the fifth village. The village of Fog, hidden along the southern shoreline, has become known as the Bloody Mist. Most of Vacuo's notable assassins, criminals, or even dark hunters have claimed this land as their home. The village was surrounded by both land and sea grim, and even occasionally stray grapploid would pop in for a quick hello. With the danger so high, it could be understood why Fog's founder was notoriously harsh in their basic training. Supposedly, they even submitted the students to partnering up upon enrollment, and then, on graduation, had the young partners fight to the death. The storyteller paused to take a sip of his drink. Speaking so long and about such a dark topic always made his tongue dry. This practically was frowned upon by all the Vacuo, but for those who didn't break the law or go astray, it produced some of the strongest warriors, even a band of swordsmen who became feared. One of the swordsmen, however, was the cause of the practices, and when he slaughtered every single member of the graduation year, the Demon Butcher, the Devil's Son, the Fog's Vampire. These are just some of his titles, but his name is Zabazama Mochi. The storyteller paused once more to take another drink. The other patrons had gone white with terror. The rain outside danced upon the tavern's windows. The storyteller set his drink down and adjusted his cloak. However, his real claim to fame, what brought his disturbing graduation to light, were his actions in Vacuo's shame during the uprising of the Salamander. Vacuo's shame was the sixth village established by Vacuo's royal family, initially meant to be another hub of commerce, a second shield to match Kon. It was called Vacuo's Valor. The strongest of the five villages were moved to it, and many of the nobles that lived in Vacuo's main city soon followed. It was to be the equivalent of Vale's city. It was the equivalent of Vale's that lived in Vacuo's main cities. It was equivalent of Vale city of Vale, to be the star-studded splendor for a desolate land, the diamond in the rough, as it were. The storyteller sighed, but that isn't the case. To make a long story short, a powerful man with dark ambitions rose to power, and it took nearly the entirety of the five villages and Vacuo's military to eventually put an end of his ambitions to conquer Vacuo. Among those forces was a young Zabazama Mochi, who made his name by executing no less than 300 men, 85 women, and 40 children in the streets of Vacuo's Valor. The storyteller sighed and sat back, his hood falling to reveal a white-haired man with red tear-like lines that went down from either eyes, and had a horned headband around his forehead. Zabata escaped trial for his actions on technicality, since at the time the king of Vacuo had ordered the use of excessive force to put Valor's mad ruler down. Eventually, a ceasefire was reached, and Vacuo's Valor was erased from all legal documents, while the city itself closed its walls forever, sentenced to die out alone and unassisted by any of Remnant's forces. To this day, there's always seemed to be rain over the city, and it's become known as the crying land of Vacuo's shame. That's nice and all, mister, one of the patrons began after a brief silence, but it doesn't explain why you're here. Jiraiya blinked. He grinned and crossed his arms. No, I thought that was obvious. You see, rumor has it that Zabazama Mochi is back. More than one of the patrons dropped their mug, and the bartender dropped the glass he was in the middle of cleaning. Jiraiya laughed at their reactions and rolled up his map. Basically, Vacuo sent me here to flush him out and catch him, he said, as he tucked the rolled-up parchment into his shirt. The patrons all nearly fell over, so caught off guard by the perfect summary. One lone drunk even shot up to his feet and slammed his hand on the table. You jackass! You wasted all of our time by telling such a boring tale when you could have just said you were here to catch a madman. But then how would I have wooed the lovely lady seated at the end of the bar? Jiraiya asked with a beaming grin. The patrons, mostly men of various of gruff features, stiffed and followed his gaze to the cloaked figure he stared at. Upon closer inspection, the slightest feminine curves could be made out, and even the hand that held the glass was a bit dainty. So, You've come for Sabuza? The woman's voice, low and regal, asked. The patron stiffed even more, while Jiraiya grinned and sauntered over to her side. Yeah, he's bad news. Did I mention the part where he killed kids? Jiraiya asked as he took a seat, his back against the bar while he looked at the cloaked woman on his side. That leaves a bad stain on Bakugo, almost as bad as the Fourth War. A pin could have been dropped and be heard for miles, even over the rain. It became so quiet, the other men seated in the bar slowly began to rise up, their drinks left untouched. The bartender started to pull out something from beneath the cabinet. Now, boys, Jorah began, interrupting himself to finish his drink. He set the empty glass on the table, and his eyes drifted shut, while his smile thinned. Don't do something that you'll regret later. I've had enough of your tongue, old man, the bartender growled as he lifted a bat from beneath the sink. He gripped it tightly in both hands and pulled it over his shoulder. Frankly, it's getting on my nerves. I'm telling you to just think about what you're doing for one. The bat was swung and smashed into the side of Jiraiya's face. The bartender grinned maliciously when he saw that his strike hit home, but then, after a few beats, began to sweat as a sheer amount of aura weighed down on him. He tried to pull his bat away, but it refused to budge. He pulled and pulled, but it went nowhere fast. What the hell? Gah! Blood rushed out of the bartender's mouth, and the man looked down to see a long white spike pierced his stomach. He followed the spike back to a hole in the back of Jiraiya's cloak. The spike was the same color as the man's hair. Before he could comment on it, the spike retracted and then softened back into a small portion of Jiraiya's long white mane. See? Jiraiya started with a sigh as he pushed the bat away with his hand, revealing holes that his hair had put into the weapon. This is exactly what I wanted to avoid. You bastard! One of the patrons stuttered. He shattered his glass on the table and rushed at Jiraiya, who followed his arms over his chest. They never learn, Jiraiya muttered as he dipped his head forward. His ponytailed hair flew out from behind him like a serpent, lengthened and sharpened to a point before it pierced his would-be attacker through the chest. The other patrons stared in horror as the drunk was flicked off the hair spear and thrown through a window. They looked back to see Jiraiya's hair retract, and the man's eyes were hard and dangerous. Leave! He didn't leave room for argument. Jiraiya's eyes narrowed, and he increased his aura's output tenfold. Now, the tavern was vacant within milliseconds. I'm impressed you can still sit so calmly, Jiraiya commented as he glanced at the cloaked woman, who was in the midst of fiddling with a piece of paper. Used to this sort of thing? You're aged and weak, old man. You made a mistake coming here. The paper in her hand glinted and sharpened. Both Jiraiya and his cloaked female adversary moved faster than one could blink. Jiraiya catched her wrist in his hand before her paper knife could stab him into the eye, well away from his bangs. Likewise, a massive grouping of white sheets prevented Jiraiya's hair from piercing her like it had the two unfortunate souls from before. The movement did one thing in Jiraiya's favor. It made his adversary's foot fall. Well, aren't you the beautiful specimen? Jiraiya asked as a grin spread across his face. The woman had exotic blue hair that was kept short, with a paper rose on the left side of her hair. Hate-filled amber eyes that were highlighted by her azure eyeliner glared at him. Her full lips remained pursed in annoyance, which drew attention to the lone stud piercing that penetrated her lower lip. Jiraiya soaked it all up, and his eyes ventured downward for a brief moment before they rose up once again. What will it take for me to get that cloak off? He asked. All I want from you is your life, Toad Sage Jiraiya. It would be a great boon to have claimed the life of the leader of Mount Miyaboku. Jiraiya's carefree grin fell, and his gaze once more hardened. How do you know of my mountain? You don't remember? The woman's lips twitched upward, but quickly remained flat. Why, you told me of it yourself, Master Jiraiya. Master? Jiraiya thought in confusion before he was launched out of his seat by a sudden amount of pressure in his stomach. He burst through the tavern's wall into the empty streets of vacuous shame. The rain pelted the muddy ground furiously, like a drum wailed on by a child. Jiraiya picked himself up off the ground and narrowed his eyes as the woman walked out the hole he made, the paper fist that had formed at her side slowly falling apart due to the weather. Once, long ago, I had hoped you would return to this place and take us with you to Kon. The woman's stony face told more than her words as she held her hand out and a small knife slid from her sleeve into her grasp. The soggy paper on the ground suddenly rose up and latched onto her hand to mold around the small knife. A simple scythe made of paper spread from her hand, and amber eyes narrowed. Now, I wish you hadn't returned, because it's my duty to God to put down any of his foes. I'm sorry I hadn't recognized you, but I was stunned by how beautiful you because beautiful you became over the years, Jiraiya muttered. His gaze softened and a gentle smile crossed his lips. I thought you died, otherwise I would have come to save you sooner, Konan. Spare me your charm, Master Jiraiya, the woman, Konan said without any malice or anger. She spoke with sorrow that was barely noticeable, and Jiraiya almost flinched at her words. You know you should have listened to the snake and killed us when you had the chance. 30 years ago. Young Jiraiya, clad in gear befitting that of a soldier, knelt beside a sobbing Tsunade, who wore a similar uniform with the traditional Medeki symbol on her shoulders. She was huddled over the form of their dead teammate, and even today Jiraiya would never deny that tears of his own were burning his eyes while he held her close. The last member of Team Sarutobi, a pasty white-skinned man with snake-like eyes and long black hair, wearing a lighter uniform than both of theirs, signifying a higher rank, had turned away from the body. His attention was drawn by a soft sound that came from the rubble of a building to their left. Jiraiya, Tsunade, get hold of yourself. He spoke not coldly, but calmly. At the moment, it was the same thing to Jiraiya. Orochimaru, even you can't be so callous towards dance. Shut up, idiot. His teammate, Orochimaru, he drew a sword from behind him, a long double-edged sword that had well concealed hints of an alternative ranged form. Golden, snake-like eyes narrowed at the rebel. We're no longer alone here. Not alone, Tsunade mumbled as she wiped furiously at her eyes. She followed Orochimaru's pointed finger and her hazel eyes narrowed. Would someone truly be so foolish to remain where they killed Dan? Her hands clenched into tight fists and she rose to her feet. Where they killed my love? Tsunade, no. Jiraiya got up and quickly wrapped his arms tightly around her stomach, holding her in place. She screamed and struggled in his grip. Damn it, woman, shut up and wait. No, Dan's killer could be right there. Let me go. Damn it. Damn you, Jiraiya. Tonight, if you don't shut up, I will cut out your tongue. Orochimaru snapped lowly. He held his sword up and returned his attention towards the rebel. We are members of Konohagakure no Sato's military. We will come and kill you if you do not show yourselves in 3 seconds. 3, 2, oh, holy shit, you're serious? Don't, wait, I'm coming out. A high voice exclaimed before a lone figure ran out of the building. It was short, clad in ragged and soaked clothes with a red pack that was slung from its back. The figure was a boy, no older than 10. He had spiky orange hair and a round face with brown eyes that stared at them in fear, but stood with his hands up. It's just a kid, Jiraiya muttered as he led a shark Tsunade down. And the others? Orochimaru instead asked. What are you talking about? The boy asked nervously. Just me, see? I'm up alone. Tsunade destroyed the building. Orochimaru looked at his teammate when she hesitated. That's an order, No, okay, alright. I'm not alone, the boy admitted. He turned back to the building. Guys, come out. 2 more children of the same age soon followed, a girl with short blue hair and amber eyes, and a boy with long straight red hair that hid most of his face. They came out meekly, flanking the orange-haired boy on either side, but the boy continued to stand in front of them almost protectively. 3 kids, Tsunade said softly to her teammates as she and Jiraiya came up to stand beside Orochimaru. She frowned at them and narrowed her eyes. Did you see who did that? Do that to our teammate? No, the orange-haired boy answered with a firm shake of his head. He glanced behind them and then looked down. But I'm sorry, he died. Tsunade frowned further and crossed her arms. Jiraiya glanced at her from the corner of his eye and set a hand on her shoulder. He turned back to the kids and grinned. Thank you. So where are your parents? Fighting? Hiding at a shelter? Jiraiya asked. Dead, the red-haired boy muttered lowly. The orange-haired boy and the blue-haired girl gave him a small frown, as did both Jiraiya and Tsunade. Orochimaru stepped forward and knelt down to put a hand on the red-haired boy's shoulder. Would you like me to kill you and your friends? Orochimaru, what the fuck, bro? Tsunade and Jiraiya shouted at their teammate. Orochimaru looked back at them indifferently. I'm an orphan, a war orphan like they are. Most barely survived the war zones like this. If it weren't for Master Sarutobi, I'd likely have died. In this way, they get a quick, painless death, Orochimaru explained. The orange-haired boy shoved the older man away and pushed the redhead and girl behind him. Hell no, he doesn't want to die. None of us do, you snake-faced freak. The boy glared at the man. Orochimaru arched a brow and lifted his sword contemplatively. Really? Are you certain? It would be painless, I promise. Orochimaru, Jiraiya said as he put himself between the kids and his teammate. I know you've lived a hard life, but if you do this, you'll be exactly what some of the others say you are. This is mercy in a time of war. How does that make me a monster? Orochimaru asked. Because the war is technically over, Jiraiya growled. He threw his arm out and pointed at the corpse of their friend. Besides, we've seen enough death today. Don't give in to the cycle. They'll starve or likely be killed. The girl taken and raised as a slave by scavenging bandits, Orochimaru said. Not if they can defend themselves, which they can't. They will. Jiraiya growled. He clenched his fist and gauntlets on them, and then on them began to grow spikes. I'll make sure of it. Orochimaru stared at him for a good long time before he closed his eyes and sheathed his sword. He turned to Tsunade, who had watched the exchange warrantly, and tilted his head slightly. Would you like me to prepare his body for travel? Orochimaru asked. Tsunade blinked and then looked down. I can handle it, she muttered. Then get started, Orochimaru ordered. Tsunade nodded and walked back towards the corpse of her teammate, leaving Jiraiya and Orochimaru with the band of 3 children. The snake-like man glanced back at Jiraiya, the kids, and then followed her. Over his shoulders, he gave a single parting line. Your softness will be the death of you, Jiraiya. Present. I've never regretted letting you 3 live, Jiraiya boldly proclaimed. He lifted his hands up and balled them into tight fists. I was even inspired to take on more students after I left you guys. Teaching became one of my favorite things to do, and I thought I was pretty good at it. Goes to show how much I suck if you fell into this sort of crowd. God told me to accompany him in the path of cleansing this world of war, Konan said as she readied her scythe. By exterminating an entire species? Jiraiya asked incredulously. You do realize that at this point, most of the planet's humans have some faunus lineage, don't you? That recessive gene will sprout forward sooner or later. I will plunge this world into hell if that means I've helped God achieve true peace, Konan intoned. Grip on her scythe tightened. Her eyes narrowed. I figured you'd be more understanding, since our goals are the same. Our goals are not the same, Jiraiya growled. His padded olive gauntlets started to grow spikes along his knuckles, and it seems it is my failure as your master to teach you the path to true peace. If that is what you believe, then your only failure was leaving us alive, Konan said. She launched herself forward and made a swing with her scythe. Jiraiya jumped out of the way, and Konan wound up slicing through the building behind his previous position. That, my lovely student, is apparently something we can agree on, Jiraiya muttered as he reappeared right behind her. He prepared to throw a punch, only to quickly bring his arms up to shield his face when the paper fist that got him before sprouted from Conan's back, twice the size it was before. The surprise blow sent him back through the tavern into an old industrial building nearby. Conan kept herself upright and turned to face the direction she knocked the man in. The disinterested, if not outright bored, look remained on her face, and she began to follow Jiraiya's flight path. Just because we agree on that does not mean I will make it easy for you, Conan muttered to herself. Wow, that was a hell of a hit, Jiraiya muttered while he brushed his thumb against his lip. No blood yet. Jiraiya took the victory where he could and quickly surveyed his surroundings. An industrial water factory of some sort, a toxicity filter perhaps. No matter, it will be better than fighting in usual rain and mud, which was softer than the concrete beneath his sandals. I can't help but wonder if she planned for me to land here, or if it was out of sheer luck. Jiraiya thought to himself with a grimace. He jumped back at the sound of a water drop tapping at the ground. Dark eyes wandered from one shadow to the next, and Jiraiya reached behind him for one of his supply pouches. It seems that the Miyaboku guard won't be enough. I may actually have to use my weapon to deal with her. Guess it's about time. Hope I'm not too rusty. Hate for that sort of rumor to start spreading. My paper moved slower in the rain, Conan admitted as she emerged from a dark hallway. Her paper scythe was still in hand, and the fist protruding from her back split into 2 drooping wings. She lifted from the ground with a flap of her makeshift joints and lifted her scythe. Your advantage is lost, master. Surrender, and I will make it quick. 53. I beg your pardon. Conan blinked. Jiraiya grinned and pulled out a small cylinder. That's 53 times now that I've heard those words from a beautiful woman, and look at me, nearly 60 years old and still kicking. Your life will end here in vacuole shame, where ironically you made sure our lives began, Conan informed him. Well, we'll just have to see about that, won't we? Jiraiya tightened his grip on the cylinder in his hand and then threw his arm forward. The tip of the cylinder separated, connected by a chain to the handle, and spikes protruded from its sides. Conan used her scythe to deflect the projectile, which then retracted to a short length. Flail, a very versatile and a hard-hitting weapon, Conan mumbled. It suits you, master. Why, thank you. Jiraiya grinned cheekily and spun his flail around. I'd be honored, Conan. The last time I had to bring this bad boy out, my old teammate had gone rogue. Yes, Orochimaru mentioned the battle when he drew his blade on God. Konan muttered. She narrowed her eyes. He sought out another weapon and body not soon afterwards. Strong enough to fight Road to the point he had to fight to kill another. Oh yeah, this god of yours has to die. Jiraiya smirked and caught his flail beneath his arm. So what say we stop gabbing and fight already? My thoughts exactly. Conan lifted her scythe and added more paper to it, giving it an insane length. This should be long enough. This should be long enough to cut through your defenses. Rumor has it only the scarecrow was able to do so with a smaller blade. Little bird's tall tales shouldn't be the basis of your attack. Now stop talking about fighting me and fight me. Jiraiya barked as he threw his flail at Conan again. It was knocked aside by one of the wings this time, and Conan dove with the scythe drawn over her shoulder. She swung when she felt she was close enough, and narrowed her eyes when she felt her blade stopped. White hair spiked to sharp tips surrounded Jiraiya's body, leaving only a portion of his face free. You know, this is a bit unfair. I think I might need to clip your wings. Jiraiya partially at Conan. His hair quickly unwound from around him and bound Conan's arms and paper wings at her torso. The scythe in her hand shattered and formed little paper birds. Oh my, that's a deadly swarm if I ever did see one. Jiraiya mused. He flicked his wrist and his mace whipped around him, knocking the paper creatures out of the sky. Conan stared down at her defeated birds, not in shock or horror or even awe. It was still that same frown of impassive annoyance, as if she were more upset with his ability to not die than he was impressed with his skill. To be frank, it was quite insulting for the aged huntsman. Well, since I failed to argue with my skill, why not tell me who your god is? Jorah asked his captured student as he crossed his arms. I know his epithets: the god of tears, the immortal king of vacuous shame, and the most horrendous title one could have, the leader of the fourth war. Forgo any more of this foolishness, Conan, and tell your old master, is it Yahiko or Nagato? We're not just as well, why not just ask me? Master, a deep voice inquired from above. Jiraiya looked away from Conan and towards the speaker, and his heart nearly stopped. A man with long orange hair pulled into a high ponytail stood on the ledge over them. The cloak that signified his place as a member in the Fourth War was wrapped around his body. Piercings decorated his face and ears, going through his nose and lips in horrendous fashion. It was those eyes, those purple rippled eyes which bore past Jiraiya's physical form and stared directly into the very essence of his soul, that had taken Jiraiya's breath away. So, it's you then, Nagato? Jiraiya asked morosely once he found his voice. He closed his eyes and thought of the red-headed boy that stood behind his friends, soft-spoken, gentle, open-hearted. Jiraiya opened his eyes and glared at the impassive face of his former student. How did you turn into this monster? I did exactly as you told me I would, master. Nagato held his arms out, revealing them to bear the same stub piercings that decorated his face. His fingers had purple nail polish decorating them. You told me that my eyes were that of a god's, and I simply ascended to that level. It was a story, a fairy tale. Jiraiya snapped and slashed the air with his hand. You are no more a god than I. Perhaps you will need to be shown. Nagato narrowed his eyes and lifted one hand. Behold, the power of God. From the center of his palm, a white mask slowly emerged from a bright light, followed by the black form of a massive Ursa Grim. The bear-like Grim roared as it descended on to the ground. It could sense the hatred of its target, and its eyes turned into the same purple ripple pattern that its summoner had. Jiraiya's eyes widened, and he quickly flicked his wrist and dispatched the Grim with his flail. The Ursa's head was removed from its body, which then crashed to the ground ungracefully before it began to dissolve. Jiraiya grit his teeth and glared up at his student, forced to jump away when a massive spinning shuriken was thrown at him. His hair released Conan, and he landed a good distance from both of his former students. So what? What's your big... Oh! Jiraiya trailed off as more Grim began to appear when Nagato lifted his other hand. A grand force, easily enough to overpower a small settlement of Beowulfs, and Ursa snarled and growled at him. Nagato hovered over them with Conan at his side. For the record, master, I've stopped going by Nagato. A mortal would answer to it, but I am a god. The pro-eyed man cracked the smallest of smiles. You may call me Pain, for that is what will save this world. All right, you can summon Grim out of thin air. That's impressive. Jiraiya cracked a small cheeky grin and then lifted his thumb to his mouth. But I can do something better. A boon, so to speak, that my position grants me. Nagato and Conan watched, unimpressed as Jiraiya bit down on his thumb hard enough to draw blood. Then, with his blood, he quickly drew a symbol on his palm, his eyes still on his two former students. Once he finished, he slammed his hands onto the ground, and a plume of smoke shot up around him. So, you think you're above humanity just because you've got some special eyes, huh? Well, in that case, perhaps then I'm not human anymore either, because guess what, kid? These tears of blood on my face aren't born from sorrow. They're overflowing because of Remnant's rage. After years of my life spent in solitude traveling across the land, I've truly ascended and went from boy to sage. Jiraiya crossed as the cloud slowly dissipated to reveal several armored individuals, all wearing similar ninja-like attire beneath the metal plates. Around their heads were bands that wore the same mark on Jiraiya's headband. The Toad Sage grinned at his students and readied his flail around his arm. Prepare to be overwhelmed by the forces of Remnant's protectors. We are those that do what needs to be done, the brave few who sacrifice it all, even our lives if need be, to protect our families. This is the Wandering Toad clan of Mount Miyaboku, and I am their handsome leader, the Toad Sage Jiraiya. Nah, Pain simply narrowed his eyes. You've not matured in the slightest, master. Good, because a wise old fool once told me that maturity was overrated. Jiraiya's grin widened for a brief moment before that grin slipped into a frown. Your men have attacked my home, killed my friends, and countless other innocents. You bring the threat of the war to encourage the same suffering that you, Conan, and Yakuko had lived through. Why would you wish that on anyone else? Because in order to make peace, there must first be pain. Pain explained simply. He held his hands out and addressed his summoned monsters. Kill them. Shinobi, one of the armored warriors cried out as he drew a katana from his back, while the rest of the forces drew similar or varied weapons. Fight to the last breath. The Toad clan rushed forward with a warrior cry to meet their monstrous foes. The grim horde snarled, slashed, yelped, roared, and howled throughout it all as their numbers dwindled, but not one member of the summoned warrior fell. Jiraiya fought amongst his troops, using simple hand-to-hand or utilizing his flail as a club to dispatch the beasts. When one of his summoned warriors stopped him from targeting a large ursa that had managed to barge through the impressive front, the clan made. Lord Jiraiya, the warrior clad in red armor bearing a shield and a large forked Kanabo addressed him. Let us have these mindless beasts, and we will leave the cowardly dog to you. Many thanks, Ken. Jiraiya grinned at one of his strongest and then glared up at Pain and Conan, who simply watched the fight from above. He crouched down and crossed his arms in front of his face before he launched himself into the air. He pulled his armor back and swung his flail forward, and the tip of his weapon heading right for Pain's face. Conan! Whatever Pain was about to say was cut off as the woman moved in front of her god and took the blow for him, leaving Jiraiya slack-jawed. The older man landed on the same ledge as she and Pain rested on, and watched his former student crumble to the ground with blood pooling from her mouth. You are no longer a man, Nagato. That much is true, Jiraiya growled. He tightened his hands into fists. To make your friend die for you. Conan's actions are of her own choice. If she wishes to take a blow for me and die for it, then I will honor her sacrifice. I will then use that pain I feel to destroy whatever causes her such harm. Pain drawled. His eyes glowed bright, and he held his hands out to his side. Two white portals appeared beside him, and 5 figures emerged from them. One in particular stepped forward, and again Jiraiya lost the words that were on the edge of his tongue. Spiked orange hair that hadn't changed in the slightest told Jiraiya what he dreaded. Though piercings decorated his face and his eyes had the same rings in them as the other 5 men, it was him. It was impossibly him. Jiraiya was horrified at what had happened to the last of his shamed children. Yahiko, he muttered sadly. He looked at each of the bodies. Then these people are. Since you'll be dead, it won't matter if I tell you. These bodies are merely conduits for my power. They are my 6 paths of pain. Yahiko's mouth moved, and his voice emerged, but Jiraiya could tell that it was not his words. Then that meant the real Pain, the real Nagato, was not among them. Yahiko stepped forward and held up his right arm, just as pierced as the first bodies, and his eyes narrowed. Now, be useful for once in your life, master, and die. A massive wave of something crashed against Jiraiya's form, and he flew back. The other huntsman flipped mid-air to land on his feet. He threw his flail forward, but it reflected off of something and was launched back at his owner. Jiraiya barely managed to sidestep out of the way, releasing his flail's handle and letting it soar through the wall behind him with a loud bang that shook the building's foundation. Below him, his men fought and cut down the grim that pain summoned. A few fell, never to rise again, but more than that survived. Jiraiya put his attention on Konan's lifeless form. She gave her life to save a monster that was her friend. Across from him, eyes narrowed, Yahiko's body outstretched both hands. Jiraiya dug his head and grit his teeth. He was in for one hell of a fight. End of chapter 33.